cool. Thanks for that. Just a little malfunction to start with, but that's kind of how my week's been so far. So thanks everyone for coming on. This is the fifth and final one of our 5 weeks of coaching webinars. Hopefully all of them have been really informative, and I'm sure that we've saved the best till last. Bob is a really experienced coach developer. He's kind of been and done it, everything in coaching, and he's been working with me for the past 4 years since I've been in this role, and he's been a massive asset to both myself and Scottish Squash. So I'm sure you'll get a lot out of today. So Bob managed to find on Google a little action shot of your coaching, but do you want to give us a little bit of your background, where you've come from and how you've got yourself to this point in your career?
Yeah, okay. Well, Paul, thanks very much for asking me to join this webinar and be part of this webinar. I'm never done one of these before, so it's a first for me. I'll just give you a bit of background. So I'm a former teacher. I was a teacher of physical education for probably around about 30 years, and played and coached as a volunteer in my local rugby club up in Fife for quite a number of years. And while I was there, I got myself involved in coaching age group rugby and coached right up to Scotland under-21s and went to a couple of World Cups. I also coached Scotland Sevens in Melbourne, Commonwealth Games, and left teaching around about the age of 50 to coach full-time as a professional rugby coach in Edinburgh. Involved with Scottish Rugby for a number of years as a coach educator. And then I moved on to Institute of Sport, where I was a high-performance rugby coach for a number of years. And then moved to the role of high-performance manager with the Institute. And I was really privileged in that role to be immersed, I would say, in the coaching environment of a number of sports, from badminton to boxing to shooting to squash, women's football and cricket. So I was very privileged to be involved in that type of environment. I'm a UK Sport endorsed mentor, so I do some mentoring with coaches across the UK. And I'm currently working towards an endorsement as a coach developer with Sports Scotland, a relatively new phenomenon here in Scotland. And I'm working towards that at the moment. So that's a kind of brief history of my coaching and my coaching experience.
Great stuff. It's a hell of a resume, and I'll just back that up in I've been your guinea pig on your new coach developer course, and that's been really valuable to me. So we're going to focus on coaching practice, and we'll just tell the story of, firstly, kind of how Bob's helped me in my coaching and some of the things, like, even though I'm an experienced coach who's been coaching full time for 11 years now, of a variety of different levels, he came in and has been valuable to help me in my coaching practice. So the way that we're going to do it is a bit of an interview style webinar. So I'll just ask a few questions, and then Bob can kind of give us an insight based upon his years of experience. So the first question that Bob wanted to just ask and explain really is who coaches the coaches, because that's kind of your role now. It certainly has been with me, Bob, and it is moving forwards with what you're doing moving forward. So kind of what's the rationale between with what you're doing and this question, who coaches the coaches?
Right. Okay. So if I was to say to you that my first ever coaching course that I attended was in 1970, and the metaphor I would use was this is a scrum, this is a line out, this is a ruck, aspects of the game of rugby. It was very, very technical based. There was nothing to do with the people involved in the scrum or the ruck or the line-out. And I've seen quite an evolution of coaching development and coaching courses over the years to where I am now, which is, I suppose, learning, if you like, to become a coach developer. New phenomenon for me. I got myself involved in the programme about 18 months ago. There are 10 of us from Scotland on this programme. And basically the outcome is to become a developer. And what is a coach developer? Well, a coach developer is one who, and this is where it's unique, supports the coach in his or her own environment. So it's not a case of coaches going to a course, learning up some technical stuff and then looking to apply that. It's very much about the coach working with the coach developer working with the coach in their environment. So that's basically the essence of it, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot of research out there that suggests that the most effective way for coaches to improve is to be kind of critiqued within their own environment, much more so than going onto a course like it used to be, as you said. And I think that this is the way that coach development and coach education is going to move ahead in the future. So thinking back to the first webinar that we did, and that was about trying to improve yourself as a coach, and I talked about mentors and people like that I've had that support me, and you're obviously a big part of that. From your experience, like, why do you think it's so important, or why do you think coaches should think really seriously about having someone there to be their coach? What do you think? How do you think it can help?
Well, you know, whether it's in coaching or whatever, I think we always need someone to bounce off ideas or a go-to person of some kind. And I'm thinking back to my own coaching experience, and I kind of felt myself in a bubble a lot of the time. Who did I go to? I knew when I wasn't doing well, and I'd be told that that's not going well, or your team hasn't won. You know, that sort of comment. And if you think about the athletes that we work with, you know, they're well blessed with you as a coach. They've got their parents to go to. They've got quite a bit of support. Some of them might have ologists, if you like, if they're at the performance end of the sport. But so who looks after the coach? And it's a question I'm continually asking myself. Okay, so here we have coach developers. It's a new phenomenon in Scotland, but there must be simpler ways than that. And what I'd be saying to anyone who feels that they need support is that you reach out to someone close to you, someone that you get on with, simply to say, well, how am I doing? You know, having a go-to person very much helps your own reflection of your own coaching experience and your coaching job, or so on. So I found myself over the years latching on to one or two people that I believe could help me in some way. And I wasn't scared to go along and say, look, I don't think I'm doing too well here, come and watch me or give me some advice. So I think it's just making a connection with someone that you trust, you get on with, that who's prepared to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I think about this, I've said it before, so I won't go on about it too much, but vulnerability is such an important factor in this. Like, coaches, the best coaches are prepared to be vulnerable and will go to people and be willing to discuss their flaws, express things that they're not confident with, and look for people to help them to make improvements in this area. And the more that coaches do this, and the more coaches that are willing to be vulnerable, they're the ones that will definitely be making improvements. So that's great. So the next question is about effective coaching. I think you talked about this as kind of day one on your course and how they threw this in as a bit of a hand grenade. So the question that you got asked right at the very beginning was, what is effective coaching? Do you want to, if we could just take a pause for a second, Bob, and we will ask all the people on the webinar to just maybe write in the chat function an answer to this question, and then me and Bob will discuss it, or Bob will tell us his answer. But if a few people could just write in, what do you think is effective coaching? Alan, I can't see the screen, so maybe
that's cool. I'll keep an eye
on the loop. See what we get coming in.
So, effective coaching. So, like just making a difference in general. Happy customers, something to do. Seeking improvements, building trust by developing real relationships. So I guess a few around like relationships and people to get, so squash specific, I guess, to get people to enjoy squash and want to get better. Enabling improvement, again, understanding what your participant want and help them where you're able to do that. These are the sort of things that have come in early.
Cool, that sounds good. There's some good ones here. So Bob, if we just bring up your explanation. So you talked about the ability to apply and align expertise to particular athletes and situations to maximize learning outcomes. I think that's the scholarly answer, isn't it? Do you want to maybe bring it to life for all of us less intellectual people?
I certainly can, or I'll certainly try. Just to give you a bit of insight here, folks. It was a bit like chucking a hand grenade into a room and shutting the door. What is effective coaching? And I mean, I'm listening to the responses there, and they're bang on. They're brilliant. And then, as one does, one goes away and tries to read a bit more just to increase the learning, if you like. And I found a research paper. I'm not a great guy for research papers because, well, they're too wordy. Anyway, the research paper is written by two guys, a guy called Jean Cote and Wade Gilbert. So I read that, but coming out of that, I thought I need to make a bit more sense of that. So I summarised it, and the short summary that I provided to Paul was that effective coach has the ability to apply and align expertise to particular athletes and situations to maximise learning outcomes. Sounds very grand, sounds very theoretical, if you like. But yeah, just picking up on some of the answers there, I think they're bang on. And, you know, creating positive change. And if you think about the outcome, has to be 100% has to be the athlete. He or she's at the centre of this whole coaching process, if you like. And if we are able, through our expertise and our knowledge, our understanding of the sport, our understanding of the athletes that we're working with, our own behaviours, we may have a knowledge and an expertise in some of the sciences. Our ability to relate to young athletes, our ability to, if you like, self-reflect, all go into the mixing bowl. And the outcomes, as we say, are things like, you know, making a positive change and bringing some value to our coaching. And I've got 4 C's that I might use and I might suggest. And the first one is, you know, the competence of the athlete, you know, and that's technical competence, tactical competence, if you like. It could be their fitness. It could be, you know, a change in their healthy habits, if you like. A big one, I think, is confidence, you know, and evolving, if you like, a positive self-worth in the athlete. And we've all seen it with athletes that we work with who just grow in stature and grow in all sorts of different ways. The third C is connection, and that's about the relationships. And someone in their answer touched on that as well. And I believe that it's hugely important to build these relationships with our athletes, so that we know each other and we can be open and honest with each other. And the fourth one is the fourth C is character, and the evolution of values, our own values as coaches and within our own club environment and all the rest of it, but also the athletes' values themselves. So hand grenade in the room, shutting the door, got me thinking quite a lot, and I'm still trying to make sense of it, but I think what I've tried to do there is just summarise it down into some pretty simple, straightforward, and I like the answers, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great, and I like what you came up with, because it kind of touches a little bit on most of the aspects of really good coaching. But whatever it means to you and whatever language you come out with, it is a really good question to keep on asking yourself if you are a coach. Like, what is effective coaching, and am I doing it? Because I think a lot of people know, and we've talked about it already in this series, it's very easy to just get into the habits that you develop as a coach and just keep on doing the same things over and over. I think there's a well-known saying, isn't there, that have you coached for 10 years or have you coached for 1 year 10 times, which is just trying to get people to think about evolving as a coach and changing up their practice. So that's great. So the next question was around how to get the most out of a player, and how do you get the most out of a player within your coaching. So we split this up into a few key areas. And the first one being effective communication. So the way that we're going to do this next little section is we've got 3 key principles of what we think are important for you to get the most out of a squash player, or any athlete that you're working with. It's not specific to squash, this. And then after each one, we'll just give you an opportunity to ask any questions that are specific to the topic that you might want to ask Bob about, if that's okay. So communication, effective communication, Bob. Why is that so important for coaches?
Okay, and goodness me, I mean, there's so many ways in which we're going to be able to in which we communicate, from the minute we arrive at the club all the way through to the session and beyond the session. So if I was just maybe to start with, focus on the session itself, and I go back to my teaching days, and I had fantastic learnings when I studied to be a teacher, and the main learning in terms of teaching a lesson was to be absolutely clear and communicating clearly to the pupils or the athletes or the coaches that here is the purpose of the session today. This is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it. So there was a clear understanding right from the beginning by the pupils, by the athletes, that that's what the session was going to be about, and also creating an environment where, in fact, that communication is two-way. So it's okay for the pupil or the athlete to communicate back with you, and you can move beyond that relative to the types of communication in and through the session. Whether it's about providing feedback of some kind, using some questioning if you feel that questioning is appropriate, and also listening, and I believe that effective communication is clearly about listening as well, and that listening is hearing what the athlete's saying, hearing how they say it, and perhaps interpreting through their body language or whatever, just exactly what is coming out from the athlete, but also what you're saying to the athlete and how you say it has a big bearing, and it goes beyond that, as we've touched on before, about that interrelationship with the athletes and creating these relationships with the athletes. So clarity of purpose. What are we saying? How are we saying it? Perhaps even going as far as, checking that the athletes understand what we're saying and what we're doing and where we're going on. So I've rattled on a wee bit there, but
no, that's great. I think just to kind of summarize, because I did throw you under the bus a little bit there with that question, but you inform and tell your athlete at certain times. You question them if it's appropriate, and I think questioning is a key aspect to coaching now, and the way that young people learn nowadays. They don't want to be told, they want to explore it for themselves, and questioning is much more a part of coaching now than it was in the past. And it can be really difficult to do because you end up with a few stone cold silences, but if you can work your way through that, it's really important that you do, and that goes hand in hand with listening, which is what you said. Having a positive message is really, really important. And I think one of the things that came out with the work that we've done together was timing of a message and being able to, because sometimes you purposefully don't say something and sometimes you want to step in at a certain time. And I can remember one of the group sessions that you came along to and watched me, and your feedback to me was that it took me quite a while to call someone by their name, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to just kind of give us an insight into kind of what you saw from me when you were watching me do that session?
Yeah. There are one or two things come out of that. I think, first of all, Paul used the word feedback there. And so sometimes feedback could be interpreted as quite judgmental. And you didn't do this or you didn't do that, whatever, if you're looking at someone who's observing a coach. So part of the process, just to maybe digress a wee bit in terms of the feedback piece, is that it's all about what I would describe as the generation of feedback. So the question would be, if I was watching a session, what was your intention here? And did you meet that intention? And if so, how and how well, how much better could you do? I can come back to that. But in this occasion, I was watching a group session, and I shared with Paul what I'd noticed, and I'm very sensitive to coach-athlete interaction, and there was quite some time before there was any what I would call personal interaction, way into the session before anyone was called by their first name. And we had a discussion about that. And it wasn't you're wrong to do that or you're not wrong to do that. It was just, this is what I'd noticed. And I told this story, and it goes back to my teaching days as a deputy head in a school, which was quite a tough place. And there was always a fight on a Friday. But the headmaster would walk the corridors, and I can still remember him one day stopping a munchkin. And what I mean by a munchkin is a real pest in the school who would cause havoc in classrooms. And he stopped this kid in the corridor and said, "Jimmy, I hear your granny's just about to have her hip replaced. Please pass on my best to her." Now, what were the messages there? He knew Jimmy's first name. He knew a bit about Jimmy, and the impact that had on this kid was quite enormous. This headmaster cares for me, and so on. So, again, I've maybe ranted a wee bit, but hopefully I've answered your question, Paul.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's like, if you'd asked me at the beginning of the session, are you planning on using people's names here? Like, it would have been yes, and it's a simple thing. but it does make a big difference. And without having someone there to be able to point out these little things, it's really tough for coaches. They just, like I said, get into habits. And I guess one of the other ones that was a real kind of aha moment for me was when we were talking about the impact of positive feedback. I was doing a one-to-one lesson with an athlete, and I was given a lot of feedback. I wasn't asking questions. It was a pressure session, so I was given a lot of instant feedback, really closed information to help them through the session. We weren't stopping to have a lot of question time, but how many times did I give positive feedback, Bob? And what was the implication of that?
Well, I'll just give the group a bit of an insight into a method I used. I bought myself a listening kit, so a set of earphones, and I rigged Paul up with a mic, and I observed the session, and I just took some data. I had some headings on, giving praise, questioning, and all the rest of it. And I think in a session that lasted maybe 45 minutes or something, there was something like 50 plus words of praise. And again, it was a case of saying, well, this is what I've noticed, right? Not you've praised too much, but we got into a discussion around about, okay, how much does that praise then just become noise? And how much of that praise, if you like, is effective? So 50 pieces of praise may well become noise to one athlete, but not to another. But also, well done, great job. Aha, okay. But how might we qualify well done, great job? Great piece of footwork there. And make it perhaps a bit clearer and understandable. As I say, this was something I noticed, and I took, when I recorded the data, and we shared that and we discussed that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was so impactful, because then we had a conversation with the athlete to see, like, were they happy with the positivity that within the session and stuff like that, and they had no idea how many times I was providing positive feedback, so I was just kind of wasting air and my own energy in reality. The only times that they picked up on it was when it was in relation to something technical that they were doing, or something tangible that they were doing within it. All of my good shots, well done, were just kind of white noise to them. So it's just little things like this that you can do that can really make a real positive difference to your coaching that you might not have thought of in the past. So that's kind of, from a communication standpoint, that's what's been really helpful from my point of view. So just wanted to take another little pause here, give you the chance to ask any questions of Bob, and also to answer for yourself the 3 questions that we've got at the bottom. So we picked up this little quote that was around good communication doesn't just increase coaching skills, but it also impacts directly on the player. If someone is to learn, then they need to understand what they are being told. Research has shown that how coaches communicate directly influences how players perform and behave. And I think, would you agree with that statement, Bob?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to recognize just how crucial effective communication is, and just you don't need to write anything in here, but I think it would be good just to take a pause and think about answering these questions for yourself, which are: do you know your own communication style and preferences? Does your communication style change when the pressure is on? I think that's a really interesting one. And have you discussed with your athletes what the fastest form of communication is during a game? So there's 3 really important things that I would encourage all coaches to do and answer those questions. But if anyone's got any questions specifically for Bob around communication, do you want to write them into the chat now? And if Alan could just Let us know.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye. Yeah.
I think one thing, Bob, that we kind of maybe didn't necessarily highlight is the importance of that non-verbal feedback. I feel like we see a lot of coaches out there, especially if we're talking about when the pressure is on, that are giving off a lot of information through their body language. Do you see a lot of that knocking around?
Yeah, indeed, and I think, as I said earlier on about the communication, is that that listening piece, and in fact, the coach identifying the body language of the athlete, but also the athlete will pick up on the body language of the coach, and I think it's just being mindful of that. All right, I think also though, if we talk about communication, it could be communication with the squad, it could be communication with a couple of athletes, but at the end of the day, it comes down to coach communicating clearly with the athlete. And if we know the athlete well, or have got to know the athlete well, then we know how to apply the relative communication. Because we all know there'll be the athlete that just responds to it. Look, being told. That athlete responds to that particular means of communication, and the other one may well respond in a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, did we get any
just to jump in with some questions, Bob. So, like, someone's asking around, in your opinion, do you ever feel there could be too much verbal communication, like during a session?
Yes. Quick answer to that is yes, and I'm going to tell you a wee story here. So I'm director of rugby of a local rugby club, and my main role and my passion is managing the coaches. And two of the coaches actually lead on UKCC level 2 and level 3. And we were having a chat about communication a few months ago, and I put it to this guy. I said, now, if I came along and I was being assessed by you in a session, and I set the session and then I set the session off, and I said nothing for 10 minutes, what do you think would happen? He said, "Oh, I might fail you." Now that's the opposite to the question that was asked, but the communication has to be appropriate, I think. So that's a wee side story. But to answer the question directly, I think it could be too much communication. And so I suppose the consideration is, what is meaningful communication? And if we go back to the effectiveness and we say, right, okay, at some point, what I'm trying to do is make some kind of positive change and add some value to the session. How do I do that? And perhaps some clear communication with the athlete in a measured way, in a positive way, it would be more effective. And I go back to what we said earlier on about Paul's noise, if you like, and the athlete identified that there was just too much. So it was therefore it was meaningless.
Yeah, and I think just jumping in here, I think objective number one for when me and Bob started working together, he asked me what I wanted to work on and how he could help me, and I said the first thing that came into my mind was that I want to get better at saying as much as possible in as little time and words as I can. And I think that would be a good objective for any coaches out there. The less time that we spend talking, the more time that players can be getting on with doing what they actually want to do, which is playing the sport. Anything else coming on?
Yeah, so staying on the communication theme, Bob. So working with different maybe skill levels of player or different ages of player, do you think, does that vary? What's your thoughts on like varied communication styles depending on that?
Yeah, I think it could, right? I really do. But I still believe that it'll come down to who's in front of you. And the context of what you're coaching. It may well be very, very early on, if you think about a young group, that there needs to be a fair bit of noise from you. in order to get them organised. I'm just think about something like it's a chaotic situation here, but it's a children's party, okay? And in fact, a first session on the rugby field with 30 9-year-olds could be a children's party, and you need some really firm, loud, clear communication. Stop, stand still, shut up, that kind of stuff. Whereas at the far end, or let's say the top end of performance, it may well be that actually there is a lot of silence. I used to work very closely with a senior international coach who would stand with his hands behind his back 10, 15 minutes, say nothing. And then when players came in, his words, which were fairly minimal, were quite impactful. So I hope that answers the question. Yes, I think age and stage, what do we need to speak to? What do we need to say, and how do we say and communicate with a group of 10, 11-year-olds might be quite different from the under 18s or the senior national squad.
Cool. One more, Paul. So this could be interesting, I guess, Paul, from a squash perspective, and Bob, I guess, a little bit different when you were on the rugby pitch. But thinking about like non-verbal communication, any thoughts around non-verbal communication? So typically in a squash environment, for instance, when the players may be on the court and the coach is watching. Quite interesting, Paul, from a squash specific jet where I'm coming from.
What's the context of the question? Or is it just what could we do for the non-verbal side of things, or? Yeah,
and I guess do you use that as a way of communicating, like non-verbal methods, whether that's in training or or match sort of environments?
I mean, I can only give you my take on it and my style, but I try and stay as neutral as possible. I don't really get too excited about the good things because I'm so worried about getting too disappointed about the bad things. So I just try and stay as neutral as possible and don't really give too much away when I'm watching a player play. I think there's also an aspect that one of my rationales for doing it this way is that if a player knows that their coach is giving off a lot of information non-verbally, then they tend to look up at that coach a lot. I think especially when you're looking at juniors, when they've got parents that are really heavily invested and quite emotional, then they're the ones that are looking out the glass back or looking up on the balcony all the time. Whereas the ones that have kind of parents who are maybe just a bit more neutral, then they just keep their focus on the court and keep doing what they're doing much better than the other guys do. So I kind of learned from parents and good examples from what I saw when I was at competitions in that regard. And it's something that you need to train yourself to do. It really isn't easy. And I get a little bit carried away every now and again. But that's the way that I do things. And I think it's really important with any of this stuff that you discuss it with the athlete, because obviously different people want different things. And some people who don't want anything are quite happy with me, but other people might want that bit of encouragement, and then they look at me and I'm deadpan and they'd be like, oh, and they lose a bit of motivation from that. So it's really important to understand your athlete, as Bob's already said, know what they're looking for from you, and try and portray that as much as you can through your verbal and non-verbal language out there. Would you agree with that, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last point you made there is really important. Is that get to know your athlete get to know each other, and that could be very powerful. That could be very helpful to the athlete. So, in fact, it may well be that you agree with the athlete. Well, look, I'm deadpan. That's the way I want to be. What do you think? Give me your input to that. What would you need? And at the end of the day, what we're looking for here are athletes who are self-sufficient, that don't need to be turning around all the time to say, what do I do next? I'm being, that's a bit of a metaphor, but that we want to create athletes who are self-sufficient and can get on with it. And that's part of what coaching's all about. At the end of the day, we release them, and we're just facilitating their development, if you like.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, we'll move on from the communication. If anyone else has any burning questions, then we can hopefully answer them at the end. I think just the final message on the communication piece is make sure that you have a plan around what your communication is, what you want your communication to be for the session. If we put it into squash context, finally, a pressure session might require you to be really directive with your language. If you're doing a technical session, it may be that you are very asking a lot of questions and trying to ensure that there's some athlete discovery going on and lots of interaction between the two of you. And every session will require something different from you from a communication point of view. And it is your job as the coach to be flexible with that. So planning ahead with how you're going to approach your communication within a session is a really good starting point. Ooh. Here we go. The next section is about building rapport. So Bob, what would be some of your ideas? Why is building rapport with an athlete so important?
Well, again, it just comes back to like a mutual understanding, if you like, so that the athlete knows what I'm all about. I know what the athlete's all about. It's about showing an interest in the athlete, getting to understand what the athlete's all about. Part of that story, how's your granny getting on? Showing an interest and by building the rapport, we get this kind of this dual understanding of what we're all about, and it goes back to our earlier comments around about the way in which the athlete and the coach and in the squash competition environment understand. We've got a bit of rapport here. We know what we're about. We understand each other, and coming out of that, then it's part of relationships. And the building of relationships and the evolving of relationships is just that building of trust, right? And for me, the rapport piece also gives that, if you like, opportunity to be really honest. We get to a stage where, you know what, I can be perfectly honest with you. This is what I've seen, and you're not offended by that, because actually, equally, you can be equally honest with me. I think I've read somewhere it's called psychological safety or something. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
I'll phrase it. But just and I'll tell you where I saw it. I saw it, and it wasn't a squash. It was boxing, and I spent a year in the boxing camp before going to the Commonwealth Games as their manager, and I watched the rapport, the patter, if you like, between the coaches and the athletes. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. There was a real relaxed openness in that environment that I haven't seen it before, but yeah,
that's cool. What do you think are some good examples of a good way to go about building rapport with your athletes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think if we have an intention of and it's a simple one, I suppose, with the younger athletes, that we're going to have fun here. It's going to be a learning environment. I'm going to be open and honest. I can't really give you any specific examples, but I just think the maintaining or creating connections and been seen to be creating connections with people. And then the more we know the athlete, then the better we can build that rapport with the athlete. It takes time. It's not going to happen in 10 minutes. And in fact, with some athletes, they'll be quite resistant to that. And we just need to be patient for that. I can't give you a specific example, but I think if you're one who feels very comfortable with making connections with people, then that's a great starter for 10 for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a thing that gets forgotten about, especially with squash for some reason. But I think we've ended up coaching has become a business, which is a great thing. But you tend to go from 45-minute lesson to 45-minute lesson to an hour and a half group session, and you don't really have the time to you want to maximize every moment that you have with athletes and with players, because you worry about you don't get them as much as to see them as much as you'd like to, so you want to get as much work in as possible, and you forget about just connecting with them as a person and getting to know them, and just having a really good opportunity to get to know them in a different way and to show interest in a different way. And I think one of the best examples of someone that I've seen who's amazing at being able to build rapport is my dad at Carlisle Squash Club. He hardly ever goes on court to coach nowadays, and even when he was like full-time coaching, didn't really get on court that much. But yeah, everyone absolutely loved him, and people keep on coming back to the club because he'll say hi to them the moment that they walk through the door. He'll then ask who they're playing against. He'll then ask afterwards how they get on, and then he'll maybe go and have a little watch and say, "Oh, I feel like you were maybe struggling with your backhand return to serve," or whatever it might be. And all these simple questions to show that you care make a massive difference when it comes to building rapport.
Yeah, I mean, as you were describing the professional coach that has a 45-minute session, and I'm drawing on my notepad a glass squash court here, and I've got a little picture of what happens before and what happens after. And I think we need to find a bit of time to create that space. Because if it's just in you come, let's get started, bang, bang. I'm not saying it's exactly like that, but a bit of time before and after. And it might well be, just investing in that little bit of time. I believe the payback is massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've said it a few times, but I'm such a big advocate of it. When I first started my coaching business, one of the biggest things that helped me to build my reputation and to certainly build rapport with players, which I felt like other coaches weren't able to do, was go into tournaments with them. So traveling away to tournaments together, we would try and stay in the same hotels as a group, and then we would have meals together on the Saturday evening, and it was a whole social thing where everyone became friends as well as coaches and athletes and parents.
Yeah,
and it made such a big difference. Okay, so with this, computers, there we go. So when it comes to rapport, I found this little quote that was around connect, communicate, and build positive relationships to build rapport with your athletes. So connecting, communicating, and building positive relationships is the key thing within trying to get that rapport. And so a few little key tips for everyone. And if you got any questions around this rapport building side of things, then just type them in now. But some of the key things that came out when I was researching it was around understand the needs and motivations of the people that you coach, which is one of the things that you said, Bob. If you coach children, engaging with their parents, like I definitely found that to be a massive thing. Is it such a big thing in rugby, Bob? Or?
It most certainly is. I'll describe them with the greatest respect, but I will, and I've met them, the parents from hell, who believe that their son is the best thing ever and will play for Scotland, and why have you not picked him? And so I think in that kind of circumstance, and we see it a lot, is that I'll use the phrase, we get a retaliation in first. In other words, I think if there's an opportunity to engage with the parents, give them an insight into what you as the coach are all about, or the club is all about, some of the expectations that we have of our young athletes. That is, I think that's very powerful. I think that it's very, very helpful, and it may well be that in that kind of circumstance, you take a bit of the sting out of the, as I say, the parent from hell, who could be a bit of a challenge to you. We've all met them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them about. So the next thing would be around creating high quality coach-athlete relationships and prioritizing trust, respect, and honesty in order to be able to do that. Would they be the three key things that to stand out for you for developing good coach-athlete relationships, Bob?
100%. And I'll give you another story. I spent 2 weeks with a New Zealand franchise called Wellington Hurricanes, and in Wellington in early 2000. And the coach there was a Maori called Colin Cooper. And so this is top end rugby in the Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand rugby. His big hairy goal was to make his players better people. And as a consequence of that, he had just what we're talking about. He had little groups, little leadership groups. He created an environment where, the kind of go-to types of conversation we had earlier on about buddying up with people. And I found it an absolutely fascinating environment. Little leadership groups, for example. There was one kid, 18 years old, I can still remember his name, Tamati Ellison. He played for New Zealand Sevens, was the leader of the coaching group. And the coaching group were to feed back to the coaches on what they were sensing, what they were feeling, and all the rest of it. It was a group of 5. Tamati was the leader, and the other 4 guys in the group were All Blacks. But he was the leader of the group. But what I saw was what these 3 elements that you discussed there: great rapport, great mutual understanding of each other, great communications, and coaches there first thing in the morning, greeting players, being there last thing at night. Bit of a metaphor for a wee bit of chat before the squash session, a wee bit of chat after the squash session. So yeah, I would endorse these things. Yeah.
Stuff. Okay, and obviously we've already talked about communication skills, so that's nice that it's been put in there, and it does make a difference. It's a massive factor to developing that rapport with your athletes. Any questions that came in, Alan?
No, nothing just now, so we'll just sort of carry on.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Let's go on to the third one, and that's around kind of being a role model as a coach. So what do you think are the key things to being? We all know what a role model is as a player, but what do you think are the key aspects of being a role model as a coach, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, it's do as I do, fairly topical these days, but it's here is how I behave. Right, I behave with integrity. I behave with openness and honesty. I am approachable. The behaviours that you will see demonstrated by me will be of a standard, and it's my job as a coach to ensure that happens. I've seen the opposite, right? I've seen the opposite, and I've seen the coach, known well, who stands on the touchline and F's and blinds at the referee and all the rest of it. But I've also seen the impact that has, in fact, over time, on the players. And I'm working with one of our coaches in the club at the moment, and had a bit of a, well, let's say, here's the target, here's the work on. The work on is that you are able to allow me, or in fact, allow me to be able to stand beside you for 80 minutes of the game. Because last season, there were times when I had to walk away because of your behaviours. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And we had a discussion about his behaviours. And we had a discussion about the impact that his behaviours had on the athletes. And so, yeah, behave with integrity, be yourself, be honest, but just remember what you're asking of your athletes, and make sure that actually, you don't dip below that level of behaviour, that standard.
What do you think the impact is on the athletes when coaches maybe aren't behaving the way that they might expect the coach, or you'd maybe want a coach to be acting?
Yeah, it's a distraction. It's a definite distraction, and I'll give you a good example again, and it's to do with this coach, and he and I we've had a couple of discussions, or we did have throughout the season, but when we did our player review, we do a bit of a get a bit of qualitative feedback from the players, and we go into a bit of depth with that. And there was a bit of a thread around about his behaviours on the touchline and how that distracted some of the younger, more impressionable players on the pitch. And then when you turn it around and say, when the coach then is requiring that athlete to behave in a way, it's almost like, well, come on, you don't. I know it's very simple, basic stuff, and we've got people at the top end of government at the moment are not showing good examples, but it is that, and it's the impact, the negative impact that could likely, and more so with the younger athletes, with the young kids. And it's not the first time that I've seen people at mini rugby being asked to step away from the touchline.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think obviously there's a notable impact when it comes to competition and competitive matches and things like that for squash and definitely for rugby? What is there any changes that you're looking for from coaches when it comes to the training environment and how to be a good role model within a training environment?
Well, I think for me, consistency is the word. And again, it's that consistency both in training and in playing. And I read a little article just a couple of days ago about Eddie Jones, who is talking about taking some of Mourinho's behaviour, and he'd like to take it down onto the touchline because he thinks that his behaviour might influence his players on the pitch. Well, it really just depends on whether that behaviour for me is sociable and non-disruptive. Yeah,
it's interesting, especially when you start talking about Mourinho, for sure. So there's a couple of key things there that it's really important to put yourself in that role model position, like you are, whether you want to be or not, as a coach. So it's really important to think about what messages are you putting off, and how are you impacting the players that you are coaching. So as a coach, you are the hero you are the hero to your performers, and they begin to share your beliefs and actions. So it's obviously really important to try and live by your values and beliefs. I think a good starting point with that, Bob, would be just to understand what your own values are, right? Bob?
Hang on.
No.
We got you back?
Yeah, sorry, Paul, I just lost you there.
That's okay. So I just around this little quote that we've got. As a coach, you are the hero to your performers, and they begin to share your beliefs and actions. So just saying, if you are gonna be this role model and this hero to your athletes, especially younger athletes, we see this a lot. Like having your own values and beliefs in place and understanding what they are and how you lead by example in that regard is really important, isn't it? How do you go about doing that values and beliefs piece?
Yeah, well, I think it's. I feel as if I might just be repeating myself, but it's just having that integrity, perhaps being clear with your athletes, in your club or your squad or whatever, of what are we all about, right? What are we all about at X and 6, such a club here? Okay, what are the things that we believe in? What are some of the behaviours that we believe are part of who we are, right? And I can go back to the Wellington Hurricanes example. They were very, very clear about who they were and their identity, and that was common, and they revisited that all the time. I've done something similar with the rugby club over the last 4 or 5 years, and it takes a lot of work, right? So if we are creating an environment of values and behaviours and all the rest of it, and who's driving that? The coach. Well, then the coach has to be, that squeaky clean, if you like. He's the leader. He's the person who is leading by example, if you like.
Yeah, great. And we just got 5 bullet points there that are kind of little tips for people who are in positions and that they think they may be role models, and some of the key things to bear in mind to make sure that you do as good a job as possible to send a good message to the athletes that you're working with. So just to recap for this section, we've talked about effective coaching and how that turns into really good communication, taking the time and effort to build good rapport with your athletes.
Yeah.
And then being a really good role model for the athletes that you're working with. Alan, do we have any questions that have popped up at all?
Yeah, so a question on the role models. So it's looking at like a comparison. So role models, if you are maybe like an ex, national champion or world champion or competing at the top of your game, versus if you are not. So I guess if you've gone into coaching and gone down a coaching route, and how you could potentially overcome these if you're not in the bracket of being, an ex-professional or world champion at the top of your game.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I'll go back to the rugby context, and sometimes there's an expectation that because so and so has just come, has been an ex-professional rugby player, he's played for his country for the last number of years and all the rest of it, that he will come in and demonstrate the behaviours that we would expect of a coach, and he doesn't. So I'm not so sure that the exit. It might have a bit of weight early on with a young athlete, but I think it really comes back to you bring yourself to the relationship, whether it's the young athlete or whoever. You bring yourself and your standards and your values and the values that you've shared with the athletes in your club. And so no matter whether you're a young coach, a novice coach, a coach who actually questions yourself all the time, if you stick to these standards and values and you share them with your athletes, it doesn't matter whether you're an ex-pro or not.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm quite apt to answer that question, given the fact that I'm a very average squash player who's coaching a lot of very good players. And it certainly isn't through my background as a player that I've managed to get this opportunity. And I think it just comes down to trying to do the best job that you possibly can. As a coach, that you will maybe get accelerated and get a few more opportunities if you've got the background as a player. So I'm certainly not disregarding that, because it does make a difference to have a playing background. But that doesn't stop you from being able to progress through. I think if you are really enthusiastic and put the time and effort into perfecting your trade, not necessarily perfecting your trade, but making as much effort as you can to be skilled in your trade and be a skilled coach. There's very different attributes to a coach and to a player, and I think you need to really highlight them. If you're trying to be a player who does a bit of coaching, then that's going to come through really quickly. So understanding the differences between a player and a coach, and then really making sure that you are skilled in the areas that you need to be as a coach, it'll make a big difference, and people will take notice, and you'll get opportunities off of the back of that, for sure. Was there anything else, Alan?
Yeah, so going back, I guess, drifting back to the communication time, any examples, I guess, from Bob or either of you, at times whether communicating with some athletes may be challenging? So whether that's because of like the personality of the athlete and you had to change communication methods or styles because of that?
Yeah, 100%. And you know, in a squad of 30 to 40 athletes in a club, or in a national squad of 20 odd, you're going to get a vast range of personalities. And yeah, sometimes, you know, it's having that perhaps the difficult conversation. Can you hear me?
Yeah, keep going.
Sorry, I just am having. Indeed, and it's sometimes these conversations are not easy, and in fact, some athletes will not make it easy for you. And again, if I take something like the deselection of a player, for example, or providing some difficult feedback, if you have the data, at least that's a starter for 10. You know, I mean, simply to say I'm not picking you next week because, and don't give an answer, but there is data here and objectivity there, then that may well help the argument. And look, I think there'll be times when, you know, we're just dealing with a difficult character here, and sometimes we need to accept that and just, I suppose, cut the cloth accordingly to what we're able to do.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this type of stuff, one thing that has really helped me has been to realize that as the coach, it's your job to be flexible and adaptable. So we shouldn't be asking players and athletes to change the way that they do things unless we've got a really clear rationale as to how it's going to make them better. They will tend to want to do things the way that they want to, the way that they do things, and believe that they'll get the most out of themselves for doing that. So having the conversation beforehand to really understand how they want things and how they want to go about doing things, and then putting their effort in as the coach to really be able to do that effectively, and staying on task with it and trying to avoid drifting into your own habits or your own ways of doing things naturally, is really important too. So being the flexible one, it shouldn't be your way or the highway as the coach. I know there are some coaches out there who do that, but they will tend to only work well with a certain type of player. Whereas the coaches that can work with a vast variety of different players and be effective are the ones that are willing to flex a bit.
Sure.
So that will make a big difference.
I agreed with that. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, shall we move on? So we just wanted to, one of the big things when it comes to coaching practice is around the way that you go about coaching. I know that over the years we've gone from a very technical drill-based coaching model to everyone talking about kind of game-based coaching or teaching games for understanding and that type of stuff. So I just wanted to get Bob to give us a bit of an insight into how he's seen coaching evolve over the years and what he thinks have been the good parts and maybe some of the more negative things that he sees out there in the field when it comes to structuring coaching practice.
Yeah, you've called it the great debate, and I think it's a forever ongoing discussion on, you know, what's right. Is it drill-based coaching versus game-based coaching? And in fact, I don't believe for a minute there's any one right way. I think if we consider we as coaches and where we are right now, it may well be, and I'll use the word context. So what's the context here? It may well be that I'm dealing with a group of young beginner athletes of whatever kind, and what does that need? Or it could be the context relative to where are we in the season, or there was something that happened a couple of weeks ago that needs X, Y, and Z, or whatever. So I think we can flex, you know, depending on the need of the athletes at the time and the context of where we're coaching. And it may well be, in fact, that, you know, there is a time when we do some drill-based stuff, but what's the purpose, right? And if we consider, one, what's the purpose, but two, that we want to continually create a learning environment for these young athletes. So I'll give you one or two stories, right? So when I was at school, when I started playing rugby at school, we just played, right? We just played. We ran about, and I could still remember the teacher stopping the game and saying, "Easson, you missed that tackle. What happened?" And he asked me a question. And I can still remember it. And the boy that who I missed, his name was Gibson. He was a big unit, and it was like, "Gibson, run at Easson again." And I had to tackle this kid. And then we went on playing. And then you roll the video forward a few years, and all of a sudden in rugby, tackle bags were invented and rucking bags were invented. And what you saw on rugby pitches was a line of kids, each taking it in turn to hit a tackle bag or hit a rucking shield or whatever. And that was a kind of drill-based approach, if you like. And then I became very inspired by a Frenchman called Pierre Villepreux. And I've still got, and forgive me here, guys, but if you know what it is, then you'll recognize it. I have a VHS tape, black and white VHS tape of his coaching session. And he talked about jouer all the time. And in France, they play. And within playing, they develop their skills and their understandings and all the rest of it. And he inspired me. And for years and years and years, I followed that approach. Came up against one or two roadblocks every now and again by players saying, well, we've never been coached this way before. I need you to tell me what to do and show me how to pass and all the rest of it. So there is a big debate, but I think the bottom line for me is it's that what approach suits the environment, suits the needs of the athletes, suits the context of where we are.
Absolutely, and I think it's a great discussion topic to be having. I think it's really beneficial for coaching in general and for the industry, because it challenges people to really self-discover and look within and reflect on how are they doing what they do, how are they going about their own coaching practice.
Yeah.
When I first did my coaching awards and stuff, it was just, here's a list of different drills that you can do and structure it in this way with some progressions, and there you go, you're a coach. Whereas this whole, I'm not totally on the whole totally on the side of the games-based approach, but I'm definitely leaning more toward. I lean more towards it more than anything else because it challenges you to coach differently. It challenges you to have to do things slightly differently rather than just doing it all on it, doing a coaching session on a piece of paper and then just shouting out instructions as you go about doing it. I think one of the key things for this discussion or this debate for me is just asking yourself, what sort of sessions do you do as a coach, and making sure that your sessions have got variety. So you shouldn't be doing the same type of session every single week. You shouldn't be doing the same sessions throughout the week. Different players' needs are going to be different, and that's going to depend on where they are within their own journey. Like Bob said, the stage of the season, what they've got coming up, what they've just had, and you should be constantly asking yourself, what can we do during this session that's going to help this athlete out as much as possible? And you've got so many options now. Like, you've got drill-based stuff, you've got games-based stuff, you've got free play, you have constraints, so conditioned games and things like that. There's so many things that are out there and so many examples of great practice and all of these different ways of doing things and these different ways of coaching that for some people it might be intimidating to try out doing something new compared to your tried and tested method. But if it's going to help the player, then that's what you should be looking to explore. So I think it's a great debate to be sparking along, and I would be hesitant to go on one side or the other. But it doesn't have. It will, if you just get involved in this debate, it'll make a big difference for your coaching.
I heard the discussion between a former England rugby coach and a skill acquisition expert, and they were discussing this methodology, if you like. And the skill acquisition guy was very much about totally games based and looking for his athletes to adapt to the situation. The English rugby coach talked about using a lot of games-based, but quite happy and prepared, if the need arose, to take some 2 or 3 players out if there was a particular piece of work that needed to be done specifically, maybe with a little bit of block practice or whatever, for the purpose of just refreshing or whatever. And for me, that story just simply illustrates that actually, if you look at drills at one end and games based at the others on a bit of a seesaw, well, I think there's a balance, and it keeps shifting based on what am I doing today, and what am I doing today relative to what I did last week, and actually it might well be what I'm doing now relative to what happened 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, it's a great one. I do really like this debate, and I love listening to podcasts when people get chatting away on it. Does anybody have any questions about kind of the approach that you take when you are coaching, and is anyone more around drill based, or is anyone an advocate of games based stuff? And does anyone have any questions around the whole subject that you might want to ask Bob? When was it that you found that French guy, Bob? How long ago was it?
Oh, it was a long time ago, and in fact, yes, it was crikey, VHS tape. We're talking 25 years ago, at least.
Yeah, it's amazing how these things keep on just coming around and around, isn't it? It probably won't be too long until everyone goes back to, right, you've got to be drill-based coaching, and that's it.
Well, you see, it comes down, what does it fundamentally come down to? It comes down to the athlete learning. And in fact, if we can create an environment where the learning comes from their participation in the exercise, I'll use that word exercise, that creates not only a development of their skill, but also their understanding of the game, the their decision making, their ability to manage and deal with the pressure of this environment is key. And whereas there is a place for some, let's say, block practice, some drills, if you like, but it's been shown, and the research shows that the short-term effect is quite positive, but the long-term retention isn't there. But like game-based or small-sided games or variable practice or what have you will help create better learning and understanding and retention of the skill.
Yeah, there's loads of good research being done in this area, and one of the ones that I really like is a one from basketball, who did split a group of players into two groups. One group was asked to do 100 free throws, and the other group was to do 20 free throws, 20 throws from the 3-point line, 20 slam dunks, blah blah blah. They still did the same 100 throws to try and get a basket, but one was repetitive practice and one was varied practice. They did it for 6 weeks, and then they tested out how many free throws they could get by the end of it, and the group that had the more variety in their training scored better, despite the fact that they'd done less of the actual skill. But their variety of practice had helped them to make bigger improvements than just repetitive practice. I like that one a lot. Was there anything that came in, Alan?
Sorry, Paul.
No, nothing. Yeah, some stuff's just coming now. Just give me 1 sec, carry on, and then I'll come to you with it.
Okay, cool. What was that, Bob? Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good point, and in fact, the basic research is telling you that the block practice will give you that success at the time, but it is the retention. The guys who did the 100 free shots from the same line got very good at doing 100 shots from the same line, but put them into a game situation, then that's completely different. Whereas the random practice group would probably adapt better.
Yeah, and certainly from a squash specific point of view, like squash is so fluid and always moving, and you're always in different positions with different variables, that it's a real difficult argument to make to practice things in isolation.
No specific questions, Paul. I guess people just sharing some thoughts, which is brilliant as well. A couple, sort of sharing their thoughts that they believe in a balanced approach, both drill-based and games-based.
Yeah. Okay, nice one. Well, we're running out of time, Bob, as usual with our conversations, but if we just go to the final slide, which is your top tips for coaches out there. And we've given them 4 top tips. So do you want to maybe talk us through it? Can you see that on your screen?
Yeah. I think going back to my early days of teaching, and today, children, we're going to do this, and the reason we're going to do this is X, Y, Z. So very clear about the purpose of the session. My second one about limiting your objectives, and this again comes back to my teacher training, if you like, or as a young teacher, I wanted to achieve everything yesterday. So I wanted to do this, and this. And of course, I achieved nothing. And I learned very quickly that, limit your objectives down. What's the intention of my session here? What am I trying to get out of this? And what are the 1 or 2 key things that I could do to create this learning and this, this positive change, if you like. And maybe the negative example is, and we've all seen them or heard of them, is the poor golf coach that said, well, look, if you turn your elbow in a wee bit here and move this right foot out here a bit and turn your shoulder here, there's about 6 or 7 different things, and nothing really happens. The third one, reflect. Reflect on yourself. And what I mean by that is not necessarily
that was a good session, that was a bad session. Okay, fair enough, yeah. But more to do with, like, reflect on your behaviours. We go back to our reaction with the athletes, our approach with the athletes, conversations we had, how we delivered. So more than just that was a good session, bad session, think about deeply around about the behaviours in your session is one. Reflect with the athletes. How do you believe that went? What might have done better? What was your intention there? So, and encouraging that interaction with them. And my third reflect is over time engaging the athletes themselves to reflect on, one, their behaviours, and two, with their performance. And the final one is, and it's one that we touched on regularly across the session here, is just know your athletes.
Yeah.
Get to know them. Yeah.
Okay, absolutely great. Thanks so much, Bob, for that. Alan, was there any questions that you think might be useful to bring up at this stage?
No final questions just now. No.
No final questions. Okay, cool. Well, I guess since we've kind of come to the end, we can maybe just wrap, or the end of our time allowance, we can maybe just wrap it up, Alan, shall we?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, and I think thanks, Bob, for joining us in this one.
Thanks for the opportunity. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I think, obviously, as Paul mentioned, this was the final sort of one of the webinar that we had planned. So we'll take a break and reflect on how it's gone. We wanted to connect with more coaches through this time, so hopefully it's been helpful to all those out there. We're now chatting about, I guess, phased returns, and hopefully squash is getting closer, although that light at the end of the tunnel's maybe quite a bit away just now. Hopefully those discussions will happen. For those of you maybe not directly involved in squash, I'd encourage you to maybe follow our social media channels or check in on our website at points, because it's certainly something that these webinars have been pretty positive from our side. So it's maybe something that we'll look to continue at different points. But apart from that, in the meantime, we're here to help, and please reach out if we can support in any other way. But thanks for joining us either this week or over the previous webinars. Paul, unless you've got anything else to add,
No, that's fine with me. Thanks for signing out, and thanks to Bob for sharing his years of wisdom on this one, and hopefully we'll see you on a squash court soon. And if that's maybe looking like we're still quite far off, then we might look to put some more stuff on in the near future as well.
Great. Thanks very much, guys, and take care. Hopefully see you soon. Cheers.